A note that was never sent, a plan that was never executed, a decision to live that came at the very last moment when death seemed like the only escape from a pain that felt infinite. When 20-year-old Jordan Rivers walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, they weren't just carrying a guitar and a song. They were carrying the weight of a secret that could save lives or destroy them, depending on how the world chose to receive it. Simon Cowell thought he was about to hear another young person's emotional ballad. He had no idea he was about to witness the most important conversation about suicide and mental health that had ever been broadcast on live television. What Jordan did next would challenge every assumption about depression, about asking for help, about what it means to be strong enough to choose life when everything inside you is screaming that death would be easier, when they began to sing about standing on the edge between existence and void, when they shared the moment they chose hope over despair. Simon Cowell realized he wasn't judging a performance. He was witnessing someone use their darkest moment to light a path for others lost in the same wilderness of mental illness. Let me take you back to the moments before Jordan Rivers proved that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is decide to keep breathing, one day at a time. It was Wednesday evening at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, and America's Got Talent was in the middle of what would become its most psychologically profound season yet. The familiar energy buzzed through the venue, 3,400 audience members filling the red velvet seats, but tonight there was an undercurrent of something different. Word had spread through mental health communities and online support groups that someone was going to share a story that rarely got told in public, especially not on primetime television. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his signature black t-shirt and perfectly tailored blazer, but tonight his expression carried more gravity than usual. The producers had briefed him about this particular contestant in terms that were unprecedented. They'd explained that what they were about to witness might be triggering for some viewers, but could also be life-saving for others. Sofia Vergara was unusually quiet, having been deeply moved during the pre-show briefing about Jordan's journey from suicide attempt to this stage. Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel were both subdued, understanding that they were about to witness something that challenged every protocol about what was appropriate for entertainment television. Terry Crews had spent extra time preparing for this introduction, knowing that his words could either create safety or add to stigma around mental health. The evening had already been emotional, but everyone involved in the production understood that what was about to happen would be different. This wasn't about discovering talent. This was about witnessing healing, about seeing whether television could become a vehicle for the kind of honest conversation about mental health that could literally save lives. Backstage, Jordan Rivers sat in the contestant waiting area, their legs bouncing with nervous energy that had nothing to do with stage fright and everything to do with the magnitude of what they were about to share with millions of strangers. At 20, they looked both younger and older than their years. Younger because depression had kept them isolated from many typical coming-of-age experiences. Older because surviving a suicide attempt ages you in ways that can't be measured in years. Beside them sat their mother, Claire Rivers, a woman who had spent the last year learning an entirely new language, the language of mental health, of therapy appointments, of medication management, of watching your child fight a battle that you can't fight for them. "Are you sure you're ready for this, baby?" Claire asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. For months, Jordan had been talking about using their music to help other people who were struggling with suicidal thoughts. Once you say it out loud, on television, you can't take it back. Jordan looked at their mother with eyes that held a clarity that had been absent for most of their teenage years. "Mom, that's exactly why I need to say it, because too many people are fighting this alone, because there's so much shame around suicide that people would rather die than ask for help." The journey to this moment had been long and nearly ended before it began. Jordan had been battling major depressive disorder since age 14, but like many teenagers, they had become expert at hiding it. Good grades masked the internal chaos, extracurricular activities provided cover for the emotional exhaustion, and a carefully maintained social media presence convinced everyone that Jordan was thriving when they were actually drowning. The breaking point had come during their freshman year of college. Away from home, overwhelmed by academic pressure, isolated by depression that made forming connections feel impossible, Jordan had begun planning their suicide with the same methodical attention they had once applied to school projects. I had it all figured out, Jordan had told their therapist months later. The method, the timing, the note explaining that it wasn't anyone's fault. I was convinced that everyone would be better off without me, that I was just a burden that my family was too kind to acknowledge. The attempt had been interrupted by the most random of circumstances. A dorm mate who had forgotten their keys and knocked on Jordan's door at the exact moment when intervention was possible. The next few hours had been a blur of emergency rooms, psychiatric holds, and phone calls that shattered their family's understanding of what Jordan had been going through. The hardest part, Jordan had explained to their therapist, wasn't surviving the attempt. It was admitting that I needed help, that depression wasn't something I could just think my way out of, that asking for support wasn't weakness. Jordan Rivers, called Maria, one of the production assistants, her voice unusually gentle. The entire AGT staff had been briefed on Jordan's story, and everyone understood that they were facilitating something that was as much public service announcement as it was entertainment. Jordan stood up slowly, adjusting the black hoodie that they wore like armor, comfortable, familiar, protective. In their hands, they carried an acoustic guitar that had become their primary tool for processing emotions, too complex for regular conversation. "Remember what Dr. Martinez said," Claire whispered, referencing Jordan's therapist. "You're not responsible for saving everyone, but sharing your story might help save someone." Jordan nodded, then surprised their mother by reaching out for a hug, something that depression had made difficult for years, but that recovery had gradually made possible again. "I love you, Mom, and I'm glad I stayed." "I'm glad you stayed too, baby, every single day." Terry Crew's voice carried across the theater with unusual gentleness. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jordan Rivers." The curtain rose, and Jordan began the walk that would either be the most terrifying or most liberating moment of their life. The audience's reaction was immediate and complex. Jordan looked like any other young person, hoodie, jeans, guitar, but there was something in their bearing that suggested depths that weren't immediately apparent. They moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned not to trust that tomorrow was guaranteed. Simon leaned forward, studying Jordan with a mixture of curiosity and respect. There was something about this young person that commanded attention, not through charisma or confidence, but through simple authenticity, through the weight of someone who had something important to say. "Good evening," Terry said warmly as Jordan reached center stage, where a simple stool and microphone stand had been positioned. "Good evening," Jordan replied, their voice clear but carrying an undertone of nervousness that had nothing to do with performance anxiety and everything to do with the magnitude of what they were about to share. "What's your name?" "My name is Jordan Rivers, and I'm 20 years old." "And where are you from, Jordan?" "I'm from Portland, Oregon, where it rains a lot," which actually kind of matches my personality, Jordan said, with a small smile that drew chuckles from the audience. "I mean, it used to match my personality. I'm working on that." Terry smiled at Jordan's self-awareness. "So what brings you to AGT tonight?" Jordan was quiet for a moment, and everyone in the theater could sense that they were preparing to say something important. "I'm here because music saved my life, literally, and I want to share my story because I know there are people watching who might be where I was a year ago, and I want them to know that it gets better. But more than that, I want them to know that it's okay to ask for help." Simon's expression shifted immediately. This wasn't going to be a typical performance, and he could sense that whatever Jordan was about to share would be profound. Can you tell us more about that? Terry asked gently. Jordan took a deep breath, then looked directly at the camera that would broadcast this moment to millions of viewers. A year ago, I tried to kill myself. I had planned it out, written the note, chosen the method. I was convinced that everyone in my life would be better off without me, that I was just a burden that was too painful for people to carry. The silence in the theater was profound. 3,400 people were processing the reality that this young person was sharing the most intimate details of their struggle with mental illness on live television. But something stopped me at the last minute. My roommate knocking on my door because they forgot their keys. And in that moment, I realized that maybe the voice telling me I was worthless wasn't my voice. Maybe it was depression lying to me. Jordan's voice was getting stronger, more confident as they continued. I ended up in the hospital, then in therapy, then on medication that actually worked. And through it all, the only thing that made sense to me was music. When I couldn't find words for how I felt, I could find chords. When I couldn't explain the darkness to my family, I could write songs about it. Simon was completely absorbed, understanding that he was witnessing someone use their most painful experience as the foundation for helping others. So tonight, I want to sing a song I wrote about that journey, from the edge of giving up to choosing to fight, because if there's someone watching who's in that dark place, I want them to know they're not alone, and more importantly, I want them to know that the voice telling them they don't matter is lying. That's incredibly brave, Jordan, Terry said, his voice thick with emotion. What's the song called? It's called One More Day, and it's about the decision to keep going, even when you can't see the point. Because sometimes surviving is about taking it one day at a time until you remember what living feels like. All right, Jordan, Terry said, stepping back. The stage is yours. Jordan sat down on the stool, positioned their guitar, and looked out at the audience. For a moment, they seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were about to do, not just perform a song, but share their most vulnerable truth with millions of strangers. Then they began to play. The opening chords were simple but haunting, the kind of melody that immediately creates intimacy between performer and audience. When Jordan began to sing, their voice carried a quality that seemed impossible from someone so young. Not technical perfection, but emotional authenticity that cut straight to the just heart. I wrote a letter that I never sent, planned a goodbye, that I never meant, standing on the edge of everything I knew, thinking the world would be better without me too. Simon's expression shifted immediately. This wasn't just songwriting. This was testimony, delivered with the kind of honesty that made everyone listening feel like they were receiving a confession, a gift, a lifeline. The voices in my head were screaming so loud, saying I was just a mistake, just another face in the crowd, but something stopped me from stepping off that ledge, made me choose to live instead. As Jordan continued, their voice grew stronger, more confident. They weren't performing depression. They were performing recovery, singing about the journey from despair to hope with the authority of someone who had lived every word. So I chose one more day, when I couldn't see one more way to keep fighting, when the darkness felt so real, but I chose to feel. The audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't entertainment. This was education, therapy, and inspiration, wrapped in music that made difficult truths accessible and beautiful. One more day turned into two more days turned into something new, and slowly, slowly, the light came back, filling in the spaces where my heart had cracked. Sophia was crying openly, recognizing the courage it took for Jordan to share this story so publicly. Heidi was leaning forward, completely absorbed in both the musical performance and the message. Howie was unusually still, understanding that he was witnessing something that could literally save lives. But it was Simon's reaction that was most profound. This man, who had built his career on technical critique, was watching someone use music exactly as it was meant to be used, as healing, as communication, as a bridge between isolation and connection. The therapy helped, and the medicine too, but the thing that saved me was finding something true, that the voice that says you're worthless is a lie, and it's worth it to stay alive. As Jordan reached the chorus again, their voice soared with a power that seemed to surprise even them. This wasn't just someone singing about depression, this was someone celebrating survival, honoring the decision to keep fighting when giving up seemed easier. One more day. When you can't see one more way to keep fighting, when the darkness feels so real, choose to feel one more day. The bridge of the song became more intense, more raw, as Jordan sang about the specific moments when suicide seemed like the only escape, when the pain feels bigger than your body can hold, when you're tired of being tired and feeling so old, when you think nobody would notice if you disappeared. Remember that voice isn't yours, and you are loved here. The audience was completely silent except for the sounds of people crying, understanding that they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of public health advocacy. So choose one more day even when you can't see the way, the light is coming even if you can't feel it yet. Don't forget, choose one more day. As Jordan played the final chords, their voice became softer, more intimate, like they were speaking directly to anyone who might be struggling. And if one more day is all you can do, that's enough, you are enough. The final note hung in the air like a prayer, and for several seconds the Dolby Theater remained in complete silence. Jordan set down their guitar and looked out at the audience, seeming surprised by their own courage in sharing something so personal with so many strangers. Then the applause began, but it was unlike anything in AGT history. It wasn't just appreciation for a performance, it was recognition of courage, celebration of survival, acknowledgement of witnessing something that could change lives. But Jordan barely heard the applause because they were looking directly at Simon, whose reaction was more powerful than any standing ovation. Simon Cowell was crying, not the single tear that occasionally escaped during particularly moving performances, but deep body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from a place of profound recognition and respect. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but his microphone picked up every emotion-laden word. "Jordan," he said, and had to pause to collect himself. "I don't know how to respond to what you just shared with us." He stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during critiques. "In 20 years of judging talent, I have never heard anything as important as what you just sang, not just because of your voice, which is beautiful, but because of your courage, which is extraordinary." Simon's voice was carrying more emotion than anyone had ever heard from him. "You stood on this stage and talked about suicide, something that most people are too scared to even think about, let alone discuss publicly. You shared your darkest moment and turned it into light for other people who might be struggling." The audience was hanging on every word, understanding that Simon was articulating something profound about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. "Jordan, you didn't just perform tonight, you provided a public service. You removed shame from mental illness. You made it okay for people to ask for help. You proved that surviving isn't just about getting through the dark days, it's about using those experiences to help other people find their way out of the darkness." Simon turned to address the audience and cameras directly. "If anyone watching this is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please hear what Jordan just told you. The voice telling you that you don't matter is lying. The voice telling you that people would be better off without you is lying. And most importantly, asking for help isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can do." He looked back at Jordan, who was crying but also smiling, the kind of tears that come from relief, from being truly seen and heard. "Jordan Rivers, what you shared tonight deserves more than just applause. It deserves a platform to reach even more people who need to hear this message. It deserves recognition that could help save lives." Simon walked to his golden buzzer with absolute conviction, but then he paused. "Actually," he said, turning to his fellow judges, "what Jordan just did, sharing their story to help others, using their pain to create purpose, doesn't that deserve recognition from all of us?" Without hesitation, Sophia, Heidi, and Howie stood up and joined Simon at their golden buzzers. "Jordan Rivers," Simon announced, his voice carrying across the theater, You have just received a unanimous golden buzzer, not just for your talent, but for your courage to turn your survival into service for others. All four judges pressed their buzzers simultaneously. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, but this time it felt like more than celebration. It felt like recognition of the kind of courage that changes the world, one conversation at a time. Through all the falling gold, Jordan looked up and laughed through their tears, then immediately looked for their mother in the wings. Claire was sobbing with pride and relief, understanding that her child had just done something that could help countless other families avoid the trauma they had experienced. Jordan ran to the edge of the stage and embraced their mother while the audience continued to celebrate. "I'm proud of you," Claire whispered. "Dad would be so proud of you." "I hope someone watching needed to hear this," Jordan replied. "I hope it helps." Terry Crews approached them with tears in his own eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan Rivers, proving that our darkest moments can become our greatest light." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when the immediate celebration calmed and Jordan was able to speak directly to the audience one more time. "If you're watching this and you're struggling," they said into their microphone, "please don't give up. Please call someone, a friend, a family member, a crisis hotline. Please remember that the pain you're feeling isn't permanent, but suicide is. Please choose one more day and then another, until one day you realize you're choosing to live because you want to, not just because you have to." They paused, looking directly into the camera. "And if you can't choose it for yourself right now, choose it for the people who love you. Choose it for the person you might help someday by sharing your story. Choose it because the world needs whatever gifts you have to offer, even if you can't see them right now." 3 months later, Jordan Rivers won America's Got Talent. But more importantly, their story sparked a national conversation about mental health that led to increased funding for suicide prevention programs and reduced stigma around seeking help for depression. Their victory performance was a new song called "Lifeline," which became an anthem for suicide prevention and is now played in therapy centers and crisis intervention programs worldwide. But the numbers and recognition weren't the real story. The real story was in the thousands of messages Jordan received from people who said their performance stopped them from ending their own lives. It was in the therapy appointments that were scheduled by people who had never sought help before. It was in the conversations between parents and children who had never talked about mental health until they watched Jordan's performance together. Simon Cowell, deeply moved by what he had witnessed, established the Jordan Rivers Foundation for Youth Mental Health, providing free therapy and crisis intervention services for young people struggling with suicidal thoughts. Jordan's story became a case study in how entertainment can be used to address public health crises, proving that television has the power to save lives when it's used responsibly. 6 months after their AGT victory, Jordan spoke at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's annual conference, addressing mental health professionals from around the world. "A year and a half ago," they told the audience, "I thought my story was ending. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that sometimes our stories don't end where we think they will. Sometimes they transform into something bigger than we could have imagined." They picked up their guitar and played "One More Day, One More Time," this time for an audience of people whose job it was to help others choose life over death. "Every person in this room is fighting to save lives," Jordan said as they finished. "I want you to know that your work matters, that every life you save has the potential to save others, and that hope really is stronger than despair. We just have to be brave enough to share it." The lesson Jordan Rivers taught the world that night is profound. Our greatest pain can become our greatest purpose. Our darkest moments can become light for others, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is use our survival to help someone else choose to keep fighting. Simon Cowell learned that being a judge sometimes means recognizing when someone isn't just performing. They're providing a public service, removing stigma, creating safety for others who are struggling in silence. And Jordan proved that asking for help isn't weakness but wisdom, that mental illness doesn't define your worth, and that sometimes the most powerful performances are the ones that say, "You are not alone, you matter, and it's worth it to stay alive." The golden confetti from that night has been swept away, but the golden moment it represented, when a young person chose vulnerability over shame, service over silence, hope over despair, continues to save lives, start conversations, and prove that sometimes the most important song you can sing is the one that reminds someone else to keep breathing, one day at a time. In the end, Jordan Rivers didn't just sing about surviving suicide. They sang about thriving despite mental illness, about using pain as purpose, about the radical act of choosing to live fully and help others do the same. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the most powerful performance is the one that says, "I stayed, and I'm glad I did, and you should stay too."